The year it happened, no one in the upscale Westford district could have predicted what was coming. The city was still waking up to its usual rhythm: espresso machines whirring, Teslas humming, and suits brushing past each other like ghosts. But something happened that morning that would break headlines, fracture egos, and shatter one man's entire perception of who he was. A multi-millionaire tech mogul laughed in the face of a homeless man sprawled outside his newly opened venture capital firm. What no one expected, what not even he could have imagined, was that this ragged man, dressed in rags and surrounded by plastic bags, wasn't just another face on the street. He was blood. He was history. He was the very reason the mogul existed. And for 20 years, the two had been orbiting the same world, unaware that destiny was staging its cruelest trick yet. The rich man's name was Preston Vance, the 36-year-old CEO of Vance Tech, a darling of Silicon Valley, now expanding into real estate. He'd just acquired a towering glass building in the Westford district and was hosting an exclusive press event that morning. Cameras flashed, suits clinked champagne glasses, and journalists scribbled sound bites as Preston posed for photos, sleek in a navy Brioni suit and vintage Rolex. It was all going according to plan until one of his interns pulled him aside, whispering about a disturbance outside the entrance. Preston rolled his eyes. Another drunk, another bum, another example of why he hated cities. But when he stepped outside to deal with it personally, what he saw made him pause for half a second. The man was filthy. Gray, matted hair clung to his scalp like moldy rope. His skin was weather-beaten and cracked like old leather. He wore a faded army jacket that hung off his skeletal frame and mismatched shoes, one sneaker, one boot. He held a cardboard sign with shaky handwriting. "I'm not asking for money. Just a moment." A small, hand-carved wooden trinket dangled from his neck, a curious detail, but nothing that slowed Preston down. "Move him! Now!" Preston barked to security, ignoring the man's outstretched hand. Then he smirked. "Maybe spray him down. He'll make a great before and after photo." Laughter. Nervous, forced laughter from the interns. The homeless man didn't flinch. He just stared, eyes locked onto Preston's face like he was trying to read a language he once knew but hadn't spoken in decades. The media event continued. Preston shook hands, signed checks, and made promises about revitalizing communities, while his staff quietly had the homeless man pushed down the street. No one thought anything of it. Just another interruption from the forgotten. But that night, something began to unravel. The first odd thing happened in Preston's penthouse. He found a small wooden carving on his kitchen counter. It was the same trinket that had been hanging from the homeless man's neck. It hadn't been there before. His assistant swore she hadn't entered the apartment. Security footage showed no one coming or going. The carving was smooth, intricate. Two clasped hands, one old, one young. Preston stared at it for a long time, something tight pressing in his chest. He didn't sleep that night. The next day, more cracks formed. A man claiming to be an independent journalist emailed Preston's firm, saying he had information about Preston's past that would change everything. The email contained no threats, just a photo. It was an old Polaroid, grainy, slightly torn, of a young boy sitting on the shoulders of a tall, proud man in military fatigues. Preston dismissed it as spam until he noticed something that stopped him cold. Around the man's neck was that same carved trinket. And the boy in the photo? It was him. Panic whispered around the edges of his thoughts. He called his mother. She hadn't spoken of his father in decades. Said he'd abandoned them when Preston was 6. Said he died in a fire. But this photo, it wasn't just proof of survival. It was a message. And Preston had laughed in his face. The spiral happened fast. Within 48 hours, Preston's life began collapsing in slow motion. A viral video surfaced on TikTok, footage of the homeless man being shoved by security, followed by Preston's smug comment. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't the cruelty. It was the way the homeless man whispered Preston's name just before he was dragged away. Not sir, not boss. He said, Preston. The internet exploded. Speculation turned to obsession. Theories bloomed like wildfire. Who was the homeless man? Why did he know Preston's name? Why did he look so much like an older, broken mirror image of the tech mogul? Preston tried to deny it, but even his board noticed the resemblance. Then came the leak. Someone within Vance Tech anonymously published Preston's sealed adoption records. His birth certificate was missing a father's name, but a military pension fund had been paying into a private trust for him until he turned 18. The payee, a former Marine named Ellis Thorne, declared dead after going AWOL in 2004. It hit Preston like a freight train. That name. That was the name his mother had once screamed during a drunken breakdown when he was 13. He'd buried the memory, but now it clawed its way back. Ellis Thorne was his father, and Ellis Thorne was alive. Everything turned. Preston stopped leaving his penthouse. His press team resigned. Sponsors pulled out. But the worst was still coming, because someone was playing a game. The carved trinket was only the beginning. Over the next week, Preston kept finding them. On his desk, in his car. One was even placed inside a sealed box of macarons he ordered from a 5-star bakery. Each one carved more precisely than the last, each one silently accusing. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single page. Handwritten, the ink smudged in places. It read, I waited 20 years. I came to your door and you laughed. I don't want your money. I want 5 minutes. Don't make me take them. Preston was done pretending. He hired private security, moved to a secondary residence outside the city, ordered a deep dive on Ellis Thorne, including all records, military, medical, criminal. What he found chilled him to the bone. Ellis had indeed gone AWOL, but not out of cowardice. Reports showed he suffered a traumatic brain injury during a covert operation and disappeared during treatment. No body was ever found, but hospital logs revealed something more disturbing. Ellis had been institutionalized under a false name for nearly a decade before being discharged and lost to the system. No one followed up. No one cared. Until now. Preston knew he had to find him, not just because of the media storm, not even for closure, but because something in that final letter hinted at danger. A man abandoned by the world, possibly unstable, now resurfacing and targeting the one person who should have cared most. But the question hung like a shadow. Why now? The last known sighting came from a street camera near an abandoned church in Southside. Preston went alone. The drive took 30 minutes, but it felt like hours. The building loomed under a gray sky, stained glass shattered, graffiti carved across its wooden doors. Preston hesitated, heart racing, then stepped inside. It was dark, cold, silent, until a single candle flickered in the center of the altar. And next to it, another carving. But this one was different. It wasn't two hands. It was a father holding a child. And beneath it, scratched into the wooden altar, were 5 words. I never stopped looking, Preston. He turned. There was someone standing in the shadows at the edge of the chapel. Just standing, watching, breathing. Dad? Preston's voice cracked. But before anything else could be said, headlights swept across the broken stained glass from outside. Tires screeched. Then the shouts came. Police, journalists, or something else. The shadow figure didn't move, but Preston did. He looked toward the door, back to the man in the shadows, and then everything went black. Because someone had just cut the power. Darkness swallowed the chapel in an instant. 1 second, the flickering candle threw a halo over the carved altar. The next, everything went dead silent and pitch black, as if the whole world had taken a breath and forgot how to exhale. Preston stood frozen, spine rigid, eyes wide, the ghost of his father still lingering in the space where shadows loomed. His breathing quickened. Panic clawed up his throat. He couldn't see him anymore. The figure had vanished. Or maybe it had never truly been there. The only proof was the final carving on the altar and the echo of 5 haunting words. "I never stopped looking, Preston." A loud thud rang out behind him. He spun. "Who's there?" His voice cracked again, high and unfamiliar in his own ears. Another noise. Closer. This time the shuffle of feet. Then whispering. Not words, not exactly. Just sound. Movement. Preston reached into his jacket for the compact flashlight he'd brought just in case. The small beam cut through the thick dark, casting long, jagged shadows against the ruined pews and broken stained glass windows. Nothing. He took a slow step forward, the wooden floor creaking beneath his designer boots. Another step. Then a voice, low, graveled, tired. "You came." The beam snapped toward the source. There, in the corner, beside a cracked confessional booth, stood the same man from the sidewalk. The same sunken eyes, the same filthy army jacket. But up close, in the light, Preston could see it all now. The scar above his left eyebrow, the dimple in his chin, the same dimple Preston had seen in the mirror for 30 years. He couldn't breathe. "Ellis," he whispered. The man didn't flinch. "I thought you were dead." "I was," Ellis said, stepping forward, hands raised. "At least to the world, to you. I tried to come back, but there was nothing left to come back to." Preston's fingers trembled on the flashlight. The business mogul, the millionaire, the man who once commanded boardrooms and IPOs, shaking now in the face of someone who should have been buried in the past. "Why now?" Preston asked. Ellis sighed. "Because I saw your face on a billboard, clean-shaven, smiling, successful, and I knew I had to try one last time." Preston swallowed, every defense he'd built over the years crashing down all at once. "I laughed at you," he said, "in front of everyone." "You didn't know," Ellis replied. "But I should have." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The candle flickered again, as if in response to the air tightening around them. Ellis finally moved closer, slow and deliberate. Preston didn't step back. "I didn't leave you," Ellis said, his voice breaking for the first time. "I was in the hospital. They told me I'd never be stable again. I was drugged out of my mind. Then they released me with nowhere to go. By the time I found your mother again, she was gone." "I thought you abandoned us," Preston said, the truth crumbling inside him. "She said you walked away, said you died in a fire." Ellis looked down. Maybe it was easier for her to say that than tell the truth. That I was broken, that I couldn't hold a job, that I slept under bridges and in alleyways while my son became one of the richest men in America. Silence again. This time, thick with the weight of decades lost. Preston's flashlight dimmed, then blinked out completely. Pitch black again. A loud crash echoed outside. Then the sound of tires screeching. They both froze. Then came the shout, "Vance, are you in there?" It was a voice Preston didn't recognize. Another, "Sweep the area. We're not alone." Ellis's face hardened. "They followed you," he said quietly. "Who? The police?" Ellis shook his head. "Not cops. Private security. I saw them watching you earlier. They've been following you for days." "Mine? Number someone else's. Someone who doesn't want this reunion happening." "What are you talking about?" Ellis leaned in close. "You really think a story like ours just goes viral by accident? Someone leaked your sealed records. Someone wanted you to be exposed, humiliated." Preston's heart pounded. "Who?" But before Ellis could answer, the front doors of the chapel slammed open. Floodlights burst inside, casting blinding beams over the broken pews and altar. "Preston Vance! Hands where we can see them!" Preston turned, shielding his eyes. Men in black tactical gear stormed in, guns raised, laser sights bouncing off the cracked walls. Ellis raised his hands slowly. "Don't shoot. He's my son." The men didn't care. One tackled Ellis to the ground, knee driving into his spine, wrenching his arms behind his back. "Stop!" Preston shouted. "You don't understand who he is!" Another man grabbed Preston by the shoulder. "You need to come with us, for your safety." "I'm not going anywhere without him. We have orders." "From who?" The man hesitated, then muttered a name that sent chills through Preston's bones. "Silas Moreau." Preston stepped back. "Silas is on my board. He doesn't run my security." The man didn't answer, but Preston saw the emblem on his vest. It wasn't his private team. These weren't security. They were hired mercenaries. Ellis was dragged toward the exit, wrists zip-tied, head down. "You're making a mistake!" Preston shouted. "He's not dangerous!" "Don't fight this, Preston," Ellis called out. "They're not here for me. They're here for you." "What are you talking about?" But Ellis was already shoved into a black van outside. Preston tried to follow, but one of the men shoved him back. Another grabbed his wrist and pressed a needle into his neck before he could react. His world spun, voices blurred, lights bled into each other. Then darkness again. When he woke up, he wasn't in the chapel. He wasn't even in Westford. He was in a white room, sterile, clean, like a hospital but without the warmth. A single camera in the corner blinked red. He sat up, groggy. The door opened. Silas Moreau walked in, tall, silver-haired, dressed like a banker with blood on his cufflinks. Preston's mind reeled. "What is this?" Silas smiled coldly. "Crisis management. You've caused quite a stir, Preston." "You kidnapped me." "I protected you. That man was about to ruin everything you've built." "That man is my father." "No, Preston. That man is a threat. He's unstable. He has nothing to lose. And worse, people are listening to him now." Preston stood, fury igniting in his chest. "You knew! You knew who he was! You leaked the records!" Silas's smile didn't fade. "Of course I did. I warned your mother years ago not to let you chase ghosts, but she wouldn't listen, so I handled it." Preston's blood ran cold. "You were there?" Silas nodded. "Ellis was a problem. He always was. I had him committed. He was a distraction. You had potential. Your mother agreed. She just didn't have the stomach to follow through. But I did." Preston lunged, fists clenched. But before he could reach Silas, two guards stepped in, pinning him back against the wall. Silas leaned in close, voice like ice. "Your company's stock is crashing. Investors are spooked. If you go public with this reunion, if you stand by that man, you lose everything. Your money, your image, your legacy. I can make this all go away. Just say the word." Preston's eyes burned. "I'd rather lose everything than live another day as your puppet." Silas studied him, almost amused. "So be it." He turned to leave. Preston shouted, "Where is he? Where's my father?" Silas didn't look back. "You'll never see him again." The door slammed shut. The lights flicked off. Preston was alone, but not broken, because in that moment in the dark, something inside him reignited. The next morning, the world changed again. A video surfaced online, grainy, untraceable, but damning. It showed Ellis Thorne being abducted by armed men. It showed Preston yelling, fighting. It showed Silas Moreau giving the order. The clip went viral in less than 2 hours. Vance Tech's stock tanked. Silas Moreau was issued a federal subpoena. And Preston, he vanished. No one knew where he went. Until 1 month later, A non-profit launched in a quiet corner of the city, the Thorn Foundation. Its mission: reunite displaced families, provide mental health support for veterans, and investigate corruption in the guardianship system. Its founder never gave interviews. But every morning, just before sunrise, a man in jeans and a hoodie was seen handing out coffee and blankets to the homeless near the church in Southside. Sometimes an older man with a limp helped him. They never spoke to cameras, never gave their names, but one day, someone left a small carving on the doorstep of the foundation. Two hands clasped, one old, one young, and underneath it, the words that started it all. "I never stopped looking, Preston.